I'm Drew Stevenson, and this is a video for my Law and Economics seminar. And we're continuing my series on criminal law and applying insights from economics to criminal law. And here we're going to be talking about deterrence theory. Now, a lot of our criminal laws and punishments or policy about penal law are built on the assumption that we're trying to disincentivize people or warn people not to commit crimes, right? So we say, we don't want people to do this anymore. Let's say rob a bank or counterfeit money or sell drugs or something like that. So we're going to make a law against it and threaten you with punishment, hoping that people will be deterred from committing the crime. Now, you'll always hear some people, if you debate about whether we should criminalize certain activities, will say something like, well, criminals are going to break the law anyways, right? So this is only going to affect the law-abiding who wouldn't have followed the law. Well, there's a number of problems with that type of logic, right? That's a really simplistic argument. Well, criminals aren't going to follow the law anyways, because if that was the end of the matter, then we shouldn't have any criminal laws. We shouldn't outlaw murder, right, or rape or things like that, because on the sort of dumb logic that criminals are going to do it anyways and the law-abiding weren't going to do it anyways. But keep in mind that there are other things we do with criminal law besides try to deter people from committing crimes. So a lot of our criminal justice system is built around the idea of retribution or retributive justice, where we don't care why you did something, we don't care what you're planning to do, but if you do something that that we disapprove of or is against the law, we're going to punish you because you deserve it. And that's a very different idea than deterring people, right? A perfectly crafted deterrence law, you'll never have to enforce because everybody's deterred and wouldn't break the law. But if your idea with criminal law is we're going to punish people who are evil and did certain bad things and deserve it, well, that's retributive. That's not deterrent, right? There's other ideas like incapacitation. So this is the idea of we're going to lock you away and throw away the keys so that you can't hurt any more people. Well, in that sense, we're not trying to change what decisions you make, right? We're just trying to make you incapable of committing the crime anymore. So that's very different. Deterrence is trying to tell people basically this bad thing is going to happen to you if you commit a crime or do a certain wrongful activity or harmful activity. And therefore, we're hoping you'll decide not to do it. And that's different from the outdated practice of sending people into exile or incarcerating people, giving people life in prison so that they aren't a threat to society anymore because they're behind bars. That's an incapacitation idea. And then also keep in mind that there's a lot of laws that are passed just kind of for symbolic reasons, right? That people want to make a statement that it reflects the values of our community, that we disapprove strongly of such and such. And so therefore, we're going to threaten to punish you, even though maybe we don't ever enforce the law. We like it. It has a lot of symbolic value, let's say, for different constituent groups in society that they can say, but see, that's against the law. It's written in the law books and so forth. So we have retribution, we have deterrence, we have incapacitation, we have this sort of expressive or educative view of the law. And here, when we talk about economics, we're almost always talking about deterring crime. So having said that, let's go back to my slides and proceed. So on the most basic level, to deter a crime, the punishment has to exceed the potential payoff to the criminal, right? So I'm going to put this in very crass terms. If you are thinking about robbing a bank and you're pretty sure that you're going to get $100,000 from robbing a bank, then it's not going to deter you that if you get caught, you have to give the $100,000 back, right? In other words, we have to have whatever the threatened punishment is outweigh your reason for committing the crime in the first place. And sometimes some crimes are committed because of a potential financial payoff, like robbery, right? The financial crimes, embezzlement, larceny, and so forth. But there's other crimes that are committed just for some sort of self-satisfaction, the pursuit of pleasure, the giving vent to our anger and rage, and getting revenge on our enemies or things like that. And whatever the benefit is to you, it might be sort of an emotional or psychological benefit the punishment, in order to deter you from doing that or make you decide not to do it, the threatened consequences have to outweigh whatever you were hoping to get out of doing that criminal act. And this is where it gets complicated, right? So that's pretty simple, that deterrence, the punishment has to exceed whatever the person was hoping to, or whatever motivated this person to commit the crime. But the problem is that both punishments and payoffs are discounted in people's minds for probability. So if you think that almost nobody gets caught, or people get caught and then they get off at trial, so you're never going to have to face the punishment. So if you're pretty sure that you're going to get away with a crime, it doesn't matter what the sanction is. Because you're going to think, well, I'm still going to get away with it. So they can sentence me to life in prison, but I'm not going to serve a day of that, right? You'll hear people say. So if so people, when they're making the decisions about these actions, are not just going to think about, ooh, if I get caught, the punishment is such and such. They're actually going to discount for that for whatever they estimate. And it's always just an estimate or a guesstimate of their chances of getting caught, and the chances that once they're caught that they will actually have that punishment administered to them. Also keep in mind that people do think about, before they commit crimes, the likelihood of succeeding in the crime. So one sort of popular Hollywood genre for films is the elaborate heist, and so, or the really elaborate conspiracy crime. So there was a series of movies called like Ocean's 11 and Ocean's 12 that were these elaborate conspiracies to defraud a casino, or something like that, and where you had all these different players who had to perfectly execute their roles at exactly the right time, and so forth. No room for error, and if anything goes wrong, the whole thing would have fallen apart. That makes for a great movie, but in real life, if you're being recruited to be part of the more elaborate the conspiracy, the more likely it is to fall apart in the process and everybody get caught or not succeed at all. And so you may think that you have a pretty good chance of being able to rob a bank, but you need to think about it, right? And there's other crimes that you could do or you could commit that are much more of a sure thing. And so that's the question in the would-be criminal's mind, right? And so, but that also means that we don't have to have as much deterrence for crimes that they already would have thought were a long shot. Okay, next, let's talk about opportunity costs for crime. And we can increase the opportunity costs by making legal activities more profitable and available. And this also will deter or disincentivize crime because it offsets the expected payoff. And so if you think about things like everybody being busy, or people having lots of opportunities to get jobs, and well-paying or high-paying jobs, and so forth, then there's less reason for them to resort to a life of crime. If they can get what they want or satisfy their needs and desires with legal activities pretty easily, then the crime rate or their likelihood of committing the crime might go down. And so remember that deterring crime doesn't just involve threatening punishments or bad consequences. It could also be increasing the rewards of not doing crimes. And I'm going to give you an example. When you watch the evening news and you hear that a convenience store or a gas station near your house was robbed, you probably don't think, oh, I wonder if any of the local surgeons or partners at big law firms committed that gas station robbery. It's probably unlikely. First of all, they're super busy. They work 100 hours a week, and that's 100. If you're working 80 or 100 hours a week, that's 80 or 100 hours a week. You don't have to rob gas stations, right? And also, doctors and lawyers are heavily invested in their careers, and they're less likely to risk throwing that away, that opportunity to have this high-paying job and high-paying career for years and years in the future, for the relatively small return of robbing a gas station. So think about that you can deter crime sometimes by increasing the rewards of things that you want people to do instead. Okay, deterrence also depends on information that people have. So it depends on the big assumption that the target is aware of the potential punishment. And so if somebody doesn't even know that an activity is against the law, then we're not deterring them by raising the punishment or increasing sentences for that particular crime if they have no idea that it's even against the law. Or if people know that, right, so everybody knows that murder and rape and robbing banks is against the law, let's say, but there are some things where people are actually kind of surprised at how long the sentence can be, let's say for a felon being in possession of a firearm. So you have a felony conviction, you served your sentence, you're out of jail, and you're back integrated in the community. Well, we have a federal law that says you're not allowed to have a firearm. So if you get pulled over at a traffic stop and you have a firearm with you, we can charge you with a felony for that. And it's a pretty long sentence, right? Felon in possession of a firearm. And so, but if the reason to have that law is that we wanted to disincentivize people or motivate people who are felons not to have weapons or not to have firearms, then we're assuming that they know it's against the law and that they have some idea of how long the punishments are. Otherwise, it's not deterring them, right? And so we also assume that the would-be criminals can accurately assess the probabilities of getting caught and are accurately assessing their probabilities of succeeding in the crime and getting whatever reward or payoff that they wanted from it. Also keep in mind, even this idea of if depending on information is complicated by studies about people's psychological responses to uncertainty. And when I'm talking about uncertainty, I don't mean having no idea that something's against the law or what the punishment is, but instead knowing it is, but also knowing that there's a lot of things you don't know. So we're going to call these known unknowns. And there is some research indicating that that known unknowns deter sometimes more than known information, because people might just assume, or at least they have a little voice in their head that's wondering, what if it's the worst case scenario? So if you know something's illegal and you're not really sure how long of a sentence the crime carries, that for some people in some situations, that deters them more than if they know exactly what the sentence is and can kind of make a cold calculation about it. Okay, let's talk about a couple other concepts from economics. One is marginal deterrence. So I want you to think about the sentences for a crime, and we'll pick a crime like stealing a car. So let's say that the punishment for stealing a car for grand theft auto is 5 years. Let's pretend hypothetically, and we still have a lot of cars getting stolen. So we decide to raise the sentence to 6 years. And that's a question of marginal deterrence. How much additional deterrent value do we get from that one extra year on a sentence? If we increase the sentence for stealing a car from 5 years to 10 years, is that going to cut the crime rate in half? Is that twice as much deterrence, or is it a diminishing marginal deterrence, a diminishing marginal effect? Because maybe people figure, well, if I'm going to jail already for 5 years, a few more years, they're still willing to take that risk. And so the research indicates, when scholars research this, that there's sort of a declining or diminishing marginal value to deterrence as you add extra time on a sentence. And so I'm going to give you another example. Let's say that you're considering committing a very serious crime, like murder or something like that could carry a long sentence. Well, does it really make a difference to you in deciding whether to commit that crime if it carries a 70-year sentence versus a life sentence, life in prison? Well, for a lot of people, that's no different, right? If they're going to be in jail for 70 years, they're not sure they're going to live any longer than that. And so we have to ask the question then, as we add to punishments, are we really getting any additional deterrent effect? There's a related concept called cliffing. And this is where we have over-deterred something to the point where people have nothing left to lose. And so if you think about, for example, let's say that we decide to punish robberies, right? So muggings or rapes, right, sexual assaults with the death penalty. Well, the one concern is that criminals will have a perverse incentive to kill their victims because they can't be punished anymore, right? So if you know that you're going to get the death penalty for mugging someone, you might as well just kill them, right? Because we can't punish you any more than than executing you. And if you kill your victim, then you've actually maybe decreased the chances that you're going to get caught, right? And so we don't want to kind of send people off the cliff to the point where they're already facing the death penalty. And so they have nothing left to lose and might as well keep committing more crimes or do something even worse. Okay, on the other end of the spectrum, I want you to think about how criminal attempts, right? So our legal system punishes attempted crimes, but less severely than we punish completed crimes. But we punish attempted crimes even when no harm results. And so if you have an attempted robbery or an attempted embezzlement and it doesn't succeed because the police show up just as you're trying to commit the crime, or something. So there's no harm, but we're still going to punish you for trying. And this helps illustrate the problem or the idea of cliffing. If we punished your attempt the same in order to deter you, it would create a perverse incentive to persevere, right? To keep going and not abandon the effort. And so the idea is there's a lot of people who attempt a crime and then they hear police sirens or something, and so they give up and run away and don't complete the crime. Because even if they're later caught and charged with conspiracy or attempt, the punishment is less than if they follow through. And so keep in mind that we have these kind of gradations of punishments and what that says about deterrence and some of the complicated assumptions that we build into that. Okay, let's talk about targeted deterrence. So assume, hypothetically, this varies for type of crime, but for a lot of categories of crimes, they're disproportionately committed by young men between the ages of 17 and 25 who are living below the poverty line. And so you can come up with a form of deterrence that deters older people, like you're gonna lose your home if you commit a crime. But the fact is, most of the people that are committing at least violent crimes and thefts and things like that are younger and are judgment proof. And so this has led some economists to suggest things like a preemptive incapacitation, like the military draft. So if you draft everyone into the military when they turn 18, during their sort of peak years for that would normally be a life of crime, which is from the time they're 18 until they're about 25 and sort of get too old to grow out of it. For part of that time, they're in the highly regulated, highly supervised environment of the military. So one of the arguments, I don't agree with having a military draft, but one of the arguments for having the draft is that it can lower crime rates because it basically creates an incapacitation for a lot of the would-be criminals in that age range. You can also raise opportunity costs, right? So if you, for example, have guaranteed jobs or free college and higher education opportunities, then you give people something that they would have to forfeit or not pursue in order to invest in a life of crime or committing complicated crimes. We also could have things like a minimum age for possessing weapons. So if you think that violent crimes are disproportionately committed by people under 21 or under 25, let's say, and we make the age for owning a weapon the minimum age 21, well, you've cut out some of the years that are characteristic for a lot of our actual perpetration of violent crimes. I'm not advocating for any of these policies. I'm just pointing out that these are things that economists have at times suggested. Okay, another idea about targeted deterrence is what's called the bad apple problem. And we see this in a lot of areas with a lot of different types of crime, that there's a disproportionate number of, let's say, violent crimes that are linked to a few individuals who are pretty easy to profile or flag. And similarly, in regulatory areas like with gun stores, right? So about 95%, let's say, of gun shops and gun dealers follow the rules and seem to follow the laws. And then you get the 5% that are the bad apples that are really selling guns to people that they know are criminals or to straw purchasers and so forth. And so one of the ideas that comes up in policy, public policy, is should we target not only enforcement efforts and monitoring and surveillance, but should we target our punishment on the handful of people that kind of get in trouble all the time or commit a lot of the crimes? And one example of this that has been very controversial in our legal system is three strikes laws, right? So you've probably heard of the problem of recidivism and so forth. And this is a little bit of the idea of the bad apple problem, right? The idea that people who commit one crime are very likely to commit other crimes and so forth. And if you commit a third crime, then that means you're a serial offender. And so therefore, maybe we should have stiffer sanctions for you. There are other approaches, though, like preemptive interventions with those few. And so there are experiments being done around the country of targeting individuals who fit the profile for likely being involved in a disproportionate number of crimes and giving them job training and offering them jobs or giving them a guaranteed minimum income every month and so forth, guaranteed housing. And the argument is that this could be cheaper than having general deterrence that targets the entire population. This is one of the kind of cutting edge areas right now of trying to reduce crime rates, is identifying certain high risk individuals, they'll call them, and trying to give them wraparound social services so that because with that one person, we make a big dent in the crime rate. Okay, you learned in your first year criminal class about the insanity defense. I want you to think about this in terms of deterrence. If a person is so mentally impaired that they meet the legal test, and there were a couple, you probably learned the McNaughton test and maybe a couple other rules for the insanity defense. In theory, under the McNaughton test, the person was not unable to perceive like what the nature of what they were doing. So deterrence would have been ineffective. And there's no reason to try to deter the undeterrable. And so instead, we use incapacitation. So almost always, if people invoke the insanity defense at trial, they're going to go through civil commitment proceedings and be incapacitated instead. And that concludes my discussion about deterrence theory in law and economics.